Good morning, wherever you're tuning in from on the live stream. Good evening to everyone that's here in Glasgow at COP26 at the Extreme Hangout at the Ferry. What a cool building we're in. We've been here all day. It moves occasionally. When it does that, it's not you, it is the building. You are all fine, I hope. My name is Radha. I'm Director of Design and Facilitation at Think Beyond, a sport for social change consultancy. And I have the very great privilege of spending some time talking to some brilliant people today. Before I do that, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the team at Extreme, Alistair and Amber over there, the team at One Young World, who are putting together so much content over the day, and also the team at Think Beyond that don't get to stand up here because they're the ones that do the real work. So today's panel, the final panel of our day before the evening entertainment starts, the athlete activist. So from Tommy Smith and John Carlos to Colin Kaepernick, Megan Rapinoe, Serena Williams and Marcus Rashford. Athlete activism isn't new. It's always happened in different ways. And as professional sports has increased, we've seen more athlete activism. And over the last year or so, we've seen it even more, and it's become much more of a focal point. Social issues are being discussed, but one of the ones that has been discussed far less has been climate action, because it's hard. It's really difficult. And today, I'm privileged enough to be sitting with 5 people who are doing just that, the really tough stuff. So to set the context, we're going to show a little video. If you were here with us this morning, you would have seen in the first panel this video. So if you get to see it again, you will enjoy it again, you will be moved by it again. And if you get to see it for the first time, I'm sort of jealous, because the first time you see something, you get those goosebumps. It's pretty amazing. So if we could roll the VT, that would be great.
Dear leaders of the world.
Dear leaders of the world.
Dear leaders of the world.
This summer, at the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games,
we as athletes chased excellence in the face of challenges.
To overcome obstacles.
To lead the pack.
To go faster, higher, stronger.
Together.
Under immense pressure and adversity.
We delivered.
Meeting goals that others believe impossible.
Tokyo and the people of Japan delivered.
When many thought it impossible.
Each Games seeks to deliver a lasting legacy.
But how do we pass on that legacy if there isn't a safe and healthy planet to experience it?
Heat, humidity and extreme weather conditions
mean many of our sports are already under threat.
And sport is just one part of a much greater global picture.
We did our utmost this summer.
And we know that when we strive to achieve our best, others come with us.
Now, it's your chance to deliver.
This is the race we need to win.
And the speed of the race is determined by each of the participants in it.
At COP26,
the Olympics of climate summits,
we need you to lead us.
To show real ambition and courage.
Working together to secure the future that we all depend on.
Anything less won't win this race.
Over the next fortnight, we will be looking to you and supporting you.
To forge the ultimate legacy.
A healthy, safe Earth for all.
Yours, athletes of the world.
How are your goosebumps, hey? So let me introduce you to this illustrious panel. At the far end, we have Alexandra Rickham, GB Paralympic sailing double bronze medal winner. We have Joe Cook, a cricketer at Glamorgan and their sustainability champion. Next to me here, I have Lizzie Carr, a paddleboard pioneer and the founder of Planet Patrol. I'm going to come to the far end. We have Dr. Madeline Orr, founder of the Sport Ecology Group. And I'm coming to you last, Melissa. Melissa Wilson, GB rower and one of the core team at Champions for Earth, but crucially one of the 2 people that spearheaded this being made. So firstly, a huge congratulations. I'm going to come to you first. I've seen it a lot of times, and Claire Poole said it this morning, every time you see it, there's just something that it does. So congratulations. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing it, and since it was released on Monday, what's the reaction been?
All right, well, thank you. I guess my backstory, as you say, was as a rower, and I was selected for the Tokyo Games in 2020, and then they were postponed, and I ended up getting injured and wasn't part of the Games. And around the point of the postponement, I became involved in Champions for Earth, and we ended up writing a letter to the UK government about encouraging a green recovery. And Hannah Mills was one of the people who signed that letter, and we started having conversations over the course of the last year. And Hannah was building her campaign towards Tokyo, and our conversations gradually grew to be about what might happen after Tokyo and what we could do together in this space. So Tokyo happened, Hannah became the most successful female Olympic sailor ever, and we then, a month later, were sitting in a cafe in Poole trying to work out how we could pull something together that would be meaningful and impactful ahead of COP26, which was at that point a couple of months away. And I think what we wanted to capture was the fact that these Olympians, and Hannah included, had just come off the back of a period of time where they'd overcome obstacles, they'd overcome adversity. Tokyo and the people of Japan had delivered this amazing games. And as we looked to COP26, which I think can be figured as the Olympics of climate summits, we wanted to capture that and say, actually, these political leaders have every opportunity to be driven and resilient and push boundaries, because that's what we see athletes doing anytime an Olympics or a similar sort of event comes around.
Absolutely. And what is your hope that what's your hope for the impact that the video will make? What do you want to see change from the politicians?
I think maybe as the conversation goes on, we can go into more of the detail about what it would be exciting to come out of this summit. But I think for us, it was very much about saying, rather than turning up and looking to be within the pack and see what other people are doing, what we see with athletes is this absolute drive to the line of, I'm going to go out there and sometimes take a risk and sometimes push that boundary. And also, I think the real parallel for me between what these athletes will have been doing and what the politicians can be doing is, in a climate sense, we're looking at a challenge that's going to play out over years or decades. And sometimes that's what athletes are doing as well. They're looking at an Olympic Games that is 4 years away or 8 years away, and they're not looking at that with any sense of backing off. They still approach every single day with a real sense of urgency, and I have to make this day the best it can be in order for that moment in 4 years' time to be the best it can be. And I think if we can capture some of that, and the sense of we can't postpone or delay what we're going to do, even though some of the projections are about what's going to happen in years' time, the moment to act is now and tomorrow and the next day.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's get to know, we've got to know Melissa a little bit here, let's get to know the rest of our panel a little bit. So on the far side, perhaps you could share with us, each of you, a little bit about your journeys as performance athletes, and then how sustainability became intersected with it, whether it started there, came at the end, anything in between. Love to just get a sense of who you are before we start asking a few more questions. So, Alexandra.
Sure. So my athlete journey is a bit of a weird one. I started, I always say, like, I was born competitive. I basically came out of the womb competitive, so any sport I could get my hands on. But I only came into sailing once I became disabled, because I had a diving accident when I was a teenager. And to be honest with you, it's an amazing sport because you're out in nature, and you're also out of your chair. It's a completely different environment. So for me, really quite freeing. And so I got into that in my 20s, but that was after I'd already was on the track towards being an environmentalist. So I had done a degree in natural sciences and a master's in environmental technology. So my focus was, about saving the world, and then kind of becoming an athlete came after that. And then following Rio 2016, which I think was a huge eye-opener for a lot of athletes, because that was really, it was the first developing nation games, really, and it was also a games where we could see the impacts of, plastic pollution and other things on the ground. And so I kind of was like, I knew I was retiring, so it was time for me to kind of get back into the game and get the hard graft on the ground.
Okay, we're going to come to that hard graft shortly and find out what you've been up to. But Joe, let's come to you.
So yeah, similar to Alexandria, I studied natural sciences as well, actually, at university, and then since became a professional cricketer at Glamorgan. It's only my second season. And then along with becoming a professional cricketer, I've been studying and also just learning more about environmentalism, about climate change, about sustainability as well. And then volunteering at Friends of the Earth as well was a big moment for me, and when I kind of got really stuck into sustainability and making action and making a difference. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
So my background is I took up paddleboarding in 2016 as a means of recovery from cancer. And I suppose at the time it was very much about focused on my well-being and restoring my health again. But by being out on the water and experiencing firsthand this kind of the impact back then specifically around plastic pollution, it really opened my eyes to it. I'd say I was probably in a bit of an environmental sleepwalk until that point. And that led me then to take on a series of world first sort of endurance challenges, paddleboarding great distances and doing a lot of citizen science and data collection on those journeys to try and use adventure and sport as a vehicle for people to talk about the environment more and more. And that then led me to set up my non-profit Planet Patrol, which is a way of encouraging people in their local communities to take action via sport and wellbeing activities, but also coupling that with really important citizen science and gathering really important data that allows us to go to governments and industry and try and affect change from the top down.
Fantastic. So our 4 athletes have talked to us about the profile they've created, both sometimes having the environment part of their life to start with and sometimes it coming a little bit later on. So let's come to the academic of the group. Tell us, the response to the Athletes of the World video alongside everything that we've just heard suggests that athletes with platform and profile can make a difference. Do you think that's also the case when it comes to climate action? And why? What's the research say?
Yeah, so we've been following this for a number of years, we being the Sport Ecology Group, and we've been monitoring media coverage around climate change in sport. And one of the things that keeps coming up is athletes get way more coverage and attention than your average club, even if it's Manchester United doing something incredible for the environment. An athlete on that team will, by far and away, always have a bigger platform. And part of that is they're more relatable, right? That is the individual person that you are looking up to as a child, as a role model. And so that really resonates with people. And the other part of it is athletes are pretty good, and we've seen this happen with Black Lives Matter and the women pay equity issue, right? Where athletes do a good job of tying the issue to their identity, to their own experience. And we heard that actually with each of them in the last couple minutes. So like really good, thanks for teaming me up, guys. But they do a good job of making that identity link, which is something that sometimes politicians struggle to do, people in the media struggle to do. Athletes are quite good at it, just intuitively linking, this is my experience, this is what I've seen outside, and this is why I care. And those 3 kind of key magic ingredients are quite credible, make athletes very credible on this issue.
Fantastic, and it's really great to recognise that there's some robust data that's saying, actually, this is really, it's not just this thing that we think because we're already immersed in sports that other people are going to feel like this. But there is a bit of an elephant in the room, an endangered elephant, no doubt, that you have travelled the world and you've seen the impact. But there's the rub, there's this, you come up against this risk of people questioning, well, how can you challenge and talk about this when you are travelling the world competing? It's not a view I subscribe to, just to be clear, but I would just love to hear your experiences of it and whether you've had to have any of your own conversations with yourself, perhaps your family around you, that have helped you navigate a conflict or potential conflict. I might come to you first, if I might.
Sure. I did my footprint after the Rio 2016, just even the last year, and it was horrific. I went to Rio 4 times. But I think the reality is that we can either have a life and a world without sport and without entertainment, which I think will be a much lesser world, frankly. Sport brings people together. It is really important intrinsic to who we are, I feel. But that being said, I think as long as athletes can kind of counterbalance that with impact, in other ways, positive impact, then actually the travel becomes actually quite minor, because loads of athletes are getting, the message out there, getting people to make small changes in their lives. If any one of us up here can have somebody make one behavioral change, right, then that means, and we're keep passing that on, actually that impact is huge, and that suddenly the impact of our flight becomes really small in the bigger picture.
And it makes total sense. It must be a hard message to get other people to hear when they've decided they don't want to hear it. Do you come up against that challenge often?
Yeah, I think all the time. Like, you know, I mean, you just have to look when this video actually, if you looked at some of the comments that came out from Melissa's video, and immediately people are going, yeah, well, athletes, you know, these are all pro athletes who are flying in their private jets. Hasten to add, didn't come in a private jet. Last week, spent 14 hours on the train getting up here. This time I had to drive for other reasons. The thing is, most athletes don't earn tremendous amounts of money, right? The average athlete, you know, is actually probably having to finance themselves somewhere in the world. So the realities are they don't have access to huge amounts of cash. They're not flying on private jets. They're probably flying in the cheapest seat that they can possibly get. You know, they'd be, you know, in the luggage if they could, in order to make sure that they can get to their competition. So I think the realities are that actually, yes, there are haters out there, but we always have to come back with, you know, what are you doing? You know, is that person who's giving you the hate, what are they actually doing to make the world a better place? You know, and at the end of the day, all we can do is try to make change and try to motivate other people to make change in the position that we're all in.
Absolutely, great answer. Any other experiences anyone else would like to share, whether that's your own challenge that you've had to navigate or something that's been challenged to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think for me, the two pieces would be, I completely agree with what Alexandra is saying. I also think there's actually a real opportunity for athletes to start pushing back a little bit, not in terms of the remarks, like absolutely take those on board, actually start having the conversations with the coaches and the support team. And I think COVID's shown that we can get a lot of training done actually on home soil. It becomes more difficult when it's about competition. But my first piece would be start having the conversations and see what scope there is for actually remaining at home, because traveling is a big issue. I think the other piece for me, and I was reminded of the quote by someone in the audience, is that in this, we don't need 100 people doing everything perfectly. We need absolutely millions of people doing it imperfectly. And I think athletes are one of the pieces of the puzzle of that. And if we can be making sure that we reduce our footprint in every other way, and then have to, as part of our job, travel, that doesn't seem to me so bad a situation, and it's certainly a much better one than we remain silent and don't try to do any good because of fear of being called a hypocrite.
It's not a zero-sum game. There's no winner or loser except the world.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, so we've talked about action. Let's move on to action, because lots of people can use their voice, and you've all used your voice to great effect, but you've all taken the next step. There are sort of 3 A's that I like to think about when we're trying to do things. So we raise awareness, we advocate for change, and then we take action. And you're all in that final taking action space alongside the other 2 bits. So let's just set the scene for why sport specifically needs action to be taken for the risk for sport more broadly. So Maddie, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about what's the risks for sport if we don't take action, the lifeblood of what we all do here, really.
Yeah, so we just released some research about a month ago on what the next decade worth of mega events and major competitions is going to look like. And we found that actually, aside from the Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, which is being hosted, by the way, in their winter, so a bit of an anomaly there, every single one is facing issues with air quality, heat-related issues, which we saw in Tokyo, right? No less than 24 events were switched or changed because of heat issues. In the winter, we're facing down our first winter games that are probably entirely artificial snow, and that will be a trend that likely continues. So, there's not really any sport that escapes the impacts of climate change, and if it's not on the direct field of play, it's somebody's flight can't make it because of climate impacts somewhere else in the world, or some child isn't able to access this sport in the first place because of some impacts in their corner of the world. So, even for indoor sports, right? People will always raise their hand at me and say, well, basketball, they're not going to get hit. I promise you, there have been a lot of NBA games in the last couple of years where it's been a close call of whether the game was going to go ahead because a flight couldn't get off the ground, or they couldn't get from point A to point B, and that's, or wildfire smoke in the building. So nobody escapes this, and it's really important to draw the line between like, this is what I'm seeing as an athlete, which is what they've all done, to here's why I care and here's what you should do about it.
So for the people here who are sports fans, which I guess many of you are because you're here today, that's an awful thing to think about, right? So let's find out what each of these amazing people are doing to talk about it. And I'm going to start with cricket, because if we think about some of the major cricket-playing nations, particularly in the subcontinent, their ability to have an outfield and a wicket that's either they're unable to tend it because they've got no rain, or because the monsoons are coming at a different time. So the risk to cricket as a global sport seems to be quite high. Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Joe, because I know that you are in the early stages of your role. But you've already shared with me a little bit about how do you start in a role like that with a cricket club, traditional old sport. Perhaps you can just share how you started taking action.
Yeah, I think firstly, on that point, cricket is one of the sports that's going to be affected by it most because we're so at mercy to the weather, right? Like we had times this summer when we were hardly playing cricket. We're playing 2 out of 4 days and there's no way you can get a result in 2 days of 4. So that's why I think cricket can be a sport that can lead on this and really drive action because it needs to. So yeah, within my personal new role at Glamorgan as sustainability champion, whatever that means, at first we've just been trying to discover where our carbon footprint is within the organisation, so whether that's just the scope 1 emissions of what we consume at the ground, or the supply chain of everything, food and drink we consume, or then also obviously the travel to away games, and then obviously like the scope 3 emissions of fans actually get into the ground. So at the moment, yeah, we're just discovering where our footprint is and trying to pick off the low-hanging fruits where we can make quick changes to reduce that impact as quick as possible. And then obviously, as we go on, we'll try and come up with creative ways to, discounted tickets if you walk or if you cycle, those kind of things all come on as it goes on. But yeah, it's very exciting to actually be able to be a part of making a change, and hopefully, Glamorgan can be the next Forest Green of cricket. But yeah, it's very exciting.
Fantastic, what a great start. You mentioned the non-profit that you started. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So Planet Patrol is an organisation that encourages people to participate in different activities, so paddleboarding primarily, and then things like yoga, hip fitness, parkour, but the heritage and the sort of the foundations of it all is definitely connected with water. And I think one of the big challenges that we've already seen, I know we've talked about what potentially could happen in the future to big sporting events, but even on a very local, immediate level, we've already found that some fundraisers for Planet Patrol and the work that we're doing, taking part in paddleboarding competitions on the Thames in London, like a couple of years ago, had to be cancelled because water quality was so bad. Just this summer, we've had to cancel 3 or 4 of our organised paddleboarding clean-up sessions in different rivers around the country because, again, water quality has been so awful that it's been deemed as too dangerous for our community to go out and actually try and litter pick and participate positively in sort of taking environmental action. So that's a direct way that we've already seen that sort of the impact of climate change and what that means for our community. And one thing I suppose that I've learned on this journey is when Planet Patrol was first set up sort of 6 years ago, I was started campaigning. It was actually called Plastic Patrol, and that was because my experience had very much been around this sort of single material that I was seeing time and time again, like bottles on the water that would roll out of the one end of my board and pop up the other, or plastic bags getting caught on my fin, that kind of thing. But actually the data that we've been tracking over the last 5 years has shown this isn't really about plastic, this is about the single-use culture. This is so much bigger than demonising a single material. And for us, it's been about constantly having to relook at the work that we're doing and evolving that work and the language that we're using and the way that we're campaigning, because the problem keeps changing, the problem is shifting all the time.
And how do you encourage people to be part of your journey with the NGO?
So there's different ways that people can participate. They can get involved just by coming along to one of our cleanups. Like, they're completely free. The idea is that it's designed to be as accessible as possible for everybody, and it's always been completely free for people to participate. Or we have an app so people can download the app, and wherever they are at any time, they can just log and track litter. And then all of that information comes back to us and is analysed by partner scientists we work with at the University of Nottingham and the University of Glasgow, actually. And then we create impact reports that are shared with industry and with government, and how we can effectively try and solve this or various problems, environmental problems relating to litter, and most recently water quality. Like, how can we as citizens start gathering data and evidence around the water quality, particularly in the UK, because obviously that's where we are at the moment, to improve that over the next few years, because we're kind of at a really critical time with that as well, and it's really damaging to our freshwater environment, to our rivers, but it's not getting the spotlight as, say, things like plastic pollution is. And I think that narrative needs to, again, evolve, and we need to start having more conversations around that.
Well, I'm glad that we've started that today, and I guess the beauty of the fact that we're sort of streaming this as well is that we can start to move these conversations into a range of platforms. So thank you for sharing that. Well, we've heard about 2 of your actions. So we've seen the VT, you've told us about the letter to the Prime Minister. I happen to know that prior to the Tokyo Games, Olympic and Paralympic Games, you delivered some content to other athletes. And I see the collection of athletes there. You've taken action, but you've also inspired others to take action. Why do you think the collective action of athletes is going to make a difference?
Well, I think part of what that taps into is the fact that a lot of us operate with some of the people in society who most regularly operate in teams. And I think often this works with climate change, whoever you are. If you can do something alongside others, it helps you to feel that it's not you alone who's kind of sticking your head above the parapet and having to make a single statement yourselves. But I also think what we're trying to do with athlete education, which is one of our big focuses at the moment, is you raised one of the elephants in the room, this piece about hypocrisy and how we position ourselves with that. But I think the other issue is, how do you speak about an issue that is complicated and that you're not confident that you know enough about? And I think a lot of athletes definitely feel that as well. So one of the things that we did early this year was partner with a great organisation called Aim High, and they specialise in public climate education. And we ended up delivering a 1-hour session to Team GB and Paralympics GB athletes before they went out to Tokyo. I think that's definitely something that we're looking to continue with the Winter Games on the horizon and the Commonwealth Games next year, and also groups of footballers and individual sports as well, because I think they're a key piece of information within this space that it's helpful for us all to know. And as for athletes, if we're going to ask them to be using their platform to discuss these issues, firstly, it benefits everybody if the people speaking actually know what they're talking about, but it also helps athletes themselves feel like, no, I'm okay being here, I can speak about these issues, I know what I'm talking about.
Fantastic. So we've talked about the athletes in the sport, and you've mentioned the need for athletes to also speak to their coaches and the ecosystem within which they work about what needs to change there. And Joe, you've talked a bit about what you're doing with the sport and with your club, which brings me on to another sport of sailing and Sail GP and all of the work that you've done there. Now, whilst we had Fiona Morgan on the previous panel, not all of our audience were there. So perhaps you could share a little bit about Sail GP and the work that you've done there.
Sure. So Sail GP is a global sailing league. It's kind of like F1 on water. So they're boats that are literally flying. They're flying on hydrofoils at 60 miles an hour. So like imagine standing on top of your car while it goes down a single lane carriageway. That's basically what these sailors do. So it's a bit mental, but it's like phenomenal. And the technology is amazing because actually the boats go at 3 times the speed of the wind, which makes no sense in your brain. But the reality is that actually, just based on physics, you're able to do that. And if you think about it, that level of efficiency, if we were to able to apply technology like that to our everyday lives and to operate at that level of efficiency, it would be phenomenal. And so that's one aspect of what sport can do, because actually we have all of these amazing brains who are coming up with phenomenal ways to be more efficient and to utilize our bodies more efficiently and to utilize our equipment more efficiently. So that's one aspect of it. But from a global moving league, it's a really interesting problem because we have all of the normal problems around transportation. So how do you pack a container really efficiently so that you have less containers traveling around the world, you know. And last year we reduced our containers by 10% during the COVID period because we were like, right, get everything out of the containers and how can we put them in? There's still, you know, we still are shipping around more air than we probably needed to have been, but that's reducing, you know, as time goes by, even though the sport is growing. And then it's also working with partners, which is a really key part of that, so that you are able to, you know, bring on board temporary power providers who are on the same trajectory as you, and, you know, so that they can actually provide generators or, you know, trial new technologies, so whether that's solar fields or whether that's hydrogen generators and that kind of thing. And then the final bit is around the athletes, you know, and so at SailGP this year we started an Impact League, which is a bit of a mental one, but it's basically putting all the teams against each other to try and be the most sustainable team, in effect. And so at each event, they have to compete across 10 different criteria to become, you know, the most sustainable team. But by bringing in that competitive element, it's actually really cool. You know, sometimes it's kind of like, well, it shouldn't be about competition, but the other side is like, actually, that's what makes people do, you know, work harder because they want to be the top of the podium. And so we found it really as quite a little, you know, it's fun as well. And the good thing is also is that they're winning money for like NGOs that they're partnered up with. So actually, again, it's incentivized it, you know, so those NGOs are also then supporting them to deliver their sustainability outcomes. And so, you know, it's a first, and so it's had its teething problems, but it's a really good learning opportunity and something that, you know, hopefully we'll see rolled out in the future in other sports.
Fantastic. Well, it's certainly leading the way. And Maddie, you've spoken to a lot of different athletes from a lot of different sports. Any sort of gems that you've seen or any common challenges that have come through?
Yeah, I mean, the common challenge off the top of my head is there's this perception that you have to be a scientist or an expert to talk about this. And the truth is, if that were how it worked, we would get nowhere. And so I think it's really important that regardless of what level of athlete you are, where you come from, what your background is, just start talking about it and start with the people closest to you and refine your skills that way, and then get to the bigger audience and get to your coach, your boss, whoever. So that's one that keeps coming up, and I keep having to say, no. All you got to do is care about the planet and live here, and then like the rest takes care of itself. The other part in terms of like gems, right? We've seen some really interesting stuff come out on social media over the years, and this video is a really, really good example where you have athletes making a plea on kind of X topic. That goes particularly well when the topic is linked to their sport. Because if you think about the platform athletes have, right, the biggest social media platforms in the world, I think numbers 1 through 11 are athletes or like Beyonce, right? So it's like you got, this is who is leading the pack. And then if you go into, in any given smaller community, who has the biggest platform within kind of a small town, for example, it's also typically the athlete. It's not the mayor, it's not the teachers. And so this works at scale. And I think that's like one of the beautiful pieces I've seen is athletes who tap into the lower levels of their own sport. Because we know that, you know, little kids look up to big kids ultimately. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that they're hearing directly from these 4 here, which is amazing. And like we should hear more from people like this all the time. But if they can have, you know, the 17-year-old athlete talking to that 10-year-old athlete, that goes a long way. And then that 10-year-old's going to turn around and talk to their parents. And the interesting part there is the number one best persuader of parents is their child. They're perceived as non-political and trustworthy, which is really interesting. So the more we can get to kids, the faster we get to parents. And it could be actually, ironically, the fastest way we move forward.
Which is completely relevant for where we are today, because this is the Extreme Hangout for young people, and for those young people who are going to influence the even younger ones, which sort of brings me on to the second elephant in the room, okay? So I've worked in sport for 20 years. I've played sport for almost 40 years. Don't judge my age. And I rarely see people that look like me. And the sports sector is like that. We've known that for a long time. And therefore, this feels like an opportunity for those that are in the sport for social change and sport for climate action space to do something differently. And clearly that is crucial. I heard a brilliant phrase, I think it was from Global Citizen, and they said, those that have the least in this world will be affected first and most by climate change, and those that have the most will be affected last and least. And that is stark. And so in a world where we are now able to start talking about intersectionality for the first time, where we can talk about the fact that there isn't a huge blend of people that are taking action. And we know that sport is run by a very similar group of people, but sport at the elite level, at athlete level, isn't played by the same people. And maybe that's the biggest opportunity. And I know, Alexandra, you've talked about this a bit before, the importance of having diverse voices. Would love to hear any challenges you've come across, but also where you see the future and the change coming with that diversity of voice coming through.
So I literally chose the sport that has probably the worst diversity problem on the planet. No, sailing is like white and male, and that's the facts. It is. So as a sport, it has a long way to go. I definitely did not see anybody in a boat park. Well, there were like maybe one or two. And I think, but in terms of the intersectionality of where that meets climate action is we do need to make sure, and it is our kind of responsibility to get the sports who, especially those who are engaged, but actually get those other sports that maybe aren't as engaged to really tap into their athletes to lead that charge and to motivate change in their communities. Because as you say, for instance, let's look at track, the more that World Athletics can do to get their athletes on side, it's not, we can look at the start line of the men's 100 meters, right? You know who the minority is there, and it is not a black man, right? To keep it very simple. So the reality is, if you can get a Usain Bolt to go out there and champion climate change, and climate action, that's going to revolutionize the number of black males who are going to be engaged in, being a part of that. And we've seen that with Marcus Rashford. So I think there is very much a responsibility on the organizations at this point to also motivate that change and how we engage those populations who are going to be most affected. I'm half Jamaican, so I mean, obviously I used Usain as an example, but the reality is that, small island states are going to feel the wrath, and they are feeling the wrath. The difference in the number of hurricanes from when I was a little kid to now, like I saw one of the strongest hurricanes and was in it as a very small child, and now we're seeing these on biannual basis, and that's frightening. That's literally terrifying. But the fact is that the people on the ground are going to suffer the most who have to encounter this. Haiti has been hit multiple times, and it is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So the more that we can engage athletes in those spaces to be able to motivate change and to get that conversation started in their communities is going to be absolutely priceless in terms of helping those people and helping those communities move forward, and also lobbying those governments who need to be lobbied right here, right now, to be able to be supported, and lobby the developed world governments as well to help support those developing nations with their infrastructure and what needs to happen next. So hopefully I answered the question in a sort of roundabout way. But
you absolutely did. And Joe, I'm going to come to you next, because and I'm not going to gloss over the fact that cricket is really struggling in the broadest sense, even on the news this morning. But actually, as a player, with your colleagues who are from a broad range of communities, how engaged have they been with the fact that you're a professional player, but you're also taking on this role for the club? Has that been an easy conversation to have with them?
I think it depends on the person. I think different people have reacted differently. Obviously, get lots of people taking the mick, especially when I'm a hypocrite, when I drive somewhere or don't exactly make the perfect choice. But no, I think all in all, there's been great response from people at my club, particularly players. We actually have lots of Australian players at Glamorgan, and if you talk to them about it, they really can see the impacts back home of extreme heat, obviously wildfires a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think in terms of response to it so far, I think so many people they have the knowledge and have the experiences to talk about this, but it's just having almost the bravery to go out and talk about it. But yeah, Glamorgan so far I think is great, and everyone at the club. I actually did a questionnaire at the club recently just to get, as a start when I was a sustainability champion, just to get kind of a gauge of where everyone is. And everyone replied saying that we need to do something about our environmental footprint. So I think that just shows that it's getting out there, more and more people are getting engaged in it.
Absolutely. And one of the things we heard in a previous panel is if you can't see these changes, they don't necessarily affect you if you don't experience the outdoors. And I guess in terms of at a grassroots level, seeing lots of people experience the outdoors, you must see that in all of the work that you do, Lizzie. Do you see a cross-section of the community in your work?
It's a really interesting one. So we've surveyed this quite recently. I'd say historically, our core demographic has been white, middle-class, millennial females coming out and actively participating in our events. And that's not necessarily what Planet Patrol was designed to do. The reason it was free, the reason its events are organised in mostly disadvantaged communities is to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So that's, I think, a challenge now that we're trying to address is, okay, how do we actually convert people? We've got people that are interested in environmental issues, they're coming, they're getting involved, they're participating. We don't need to necessarily convert them. We need to speak to people that aren't aware of this problem, that aren't thinking about this every day, it's not front of mind. How do we get them thinking about this and involved and actively participating in the work that we're doing? So that's a lot of the work that we're trying to focus on now.
Fantastic. Before I come over to this side, and believe me, I'm coming to both of you, just a little reminder that you all will have an opportunity to ask questions in a few minutes. So if you have them, keep them ready, and if you don't, start thinking about them. Maddie, what are you seeing in this space? Are you seeing a shift, a change, something different in the climate action versus the social impact space? Not that I think they're separate, but they are often seen as separate.
Yeah, you know, it's one of my biggest gripes with the SDGs is they didn't just put them all together and just be like, here you go, one big goal, make the world better. You know, it's hard because I have been following the sports space for a long time, and from an academic standpoint, actually studying like how many people are on stages like this and what do they look like and who actually shows up and then who follows and who watches. The interesting part is we've started to see a little more conscientious effort to merge the two. I just think it falls really short of where we could be, frankly. And so, you know, a year ago, and Alexandra was on it, I did a podcast series on, you know, the intersections of climate and environmental justice and social issues in sport and how these things come together across a range of sports. And one of the kind of overarching themes was we really only started to see intersections about 2 years ago. So as much as I'd like to say, and I am saying, we need to do a lot more. It's so nascent, it's so new. And I think, unfortunately, there's a huge learning curve that has to be, you know, we have to get through here. And part of that learning curve is going to be get people in the same room, right? Too often you get a sport organization where Joe might be the sustainability manager. The person responsibility for equity in that organization might be over in HR. And it's not necessarily the case that those people talk or know who each other is even, particularly in bigger organizations. So part of it is just we need to start having these open conversations. And the other part of it is there's going to be a time lag. So I'm hoping that we're starting to see things track in the right direction and ask us again in 2 or 3 years and everybody will have a better answer for you. But it's too new.
Yeah.
So.
And that narrative of social justice is climate justice and climate justice is social justice is starting to come through. And clearly the intentionality of the range of athletes you had on there was really, really lovely to see. And perhaps you can share a little bit about your work with eco-athletes in the wider space there as well.
Yeah, with Champions for Earth. That's absolutely fine. Yes, I think the diversity there really fell into our lap because I think one of the things that sport quite uniquely does is tap into countries right across the world and bring them together. So that wasn't something that we had to think very hard about. I think for me, if we were having this conversation a year ago, when we were in lockdown, the person I was in lockdown with was heavily involved in social justice, and I was sitting there heavily involved in environmental work, and I definitely thought this is such a huge issue. Both of these are such huge issues, they affect the entire world, and the best thing we can be doing is blinker ourselves in a silo about doing our one thing best. I think that's maybe quite a classic athlete approach to something. I'm going to set my sights on one goal and pursue it with totality. And it was only actually the last couple of months I was reading Ed Miliband's book, Go Big, and in his opening chapters he talks about how the environment and inequality are totally inextricably linked. We cannot break them apart, because when we look at the environment and all the progress we have to make, that's something that we need everybody in a team to do. We need to bring everybody with us. And if we blinker ourselves and narrow our vision, especially in the global north, and say, right, it's just us alone, we're going to get to this finish line, totally ignores the point that actually how do we even start to bring everybody with us if we're ignoring that part, that intersectionality, as you say. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that honesty, by the way, and saying that. I appreciate that, and I think that's how we all move forward. So my last question, super quick answer from everyone before I turn it over to the audience. We've called COP26 the Olympics of the environment. What is a gold medal performance for COP26? That's my question to you guys. I'm actually not going to force you to answer it now. I'm going to ask you to hold that question in your mind while I turn over to the audience and give you a little bit of thinking time, okay? So we have some mics in the audience as needed. Does anyone have any questions for our athletes, as a group or individually? You're not going to buy them any thinking time otherwise. There we go. We've got 2 questions here, great. Lady in the green scarf first, if that's all right.
Hi, yes, thank you for all the work that you're incredibly already doing. On the last panel, we had somebody who was involved in an organization. They said they were an observer of the negotiations and how incredibly dull they were, and actually how we need to make what everybody's doing is more fun. So how do you think you can all make what you're doing more fun? You're already doing a lot, but to reach those wider audiences you talk about, how do we make this more fun?
Great question. Joe, let's come to you. You look like you're fun, Joe.
So I think actually the point that Alexandra made earlier about competition is something that I think loads of organisations are doing, and something I'm going to try and do at Glamorgan, because try and tap into that Welsh nationality, let's be the most sustainable club kind of thing. I think that's definitely a big way you can make things more fun and get more people involved, because the people you're talking to, the sports fans, are the ones that love that competition. So yeah, I think that's a big way I think that can be done.
Lizzie?
I like to think that what we already do is fun. Maybe not. I think people generally will come on a clean-up or don't come on a clean-up and will think, oh, paddleboarding and litter picking generally not much fun. But it's a bit, I liken it to picking scabs, like it's kind of disgusting but really therapeutic, and people do really enjoy it, and the feedback that we get afterwards is very much that it is fun, but you're also learning and you're being educated at the same time, and you're seeing firsthand the scale of a problem that you have actively participated in, maybe usually unintentionally. So I think the element of fun is actually really important, and it's really important to the work that we do to make people feel that they can enjoy being in the environmental movement and part of that discussion.
Excellent. Alexandra?
Hello. Hello? Oh, hello. I think our communication just needs to get better. The language that we use is so boring. Let's just make it fun. Let's throw in some new fun words. Also, we need to stop changing the language so much. It's like overwhelming. 1 minute you're a small island developing state, next minute you're a big ocean state, or you're this, or I'm confused half the time about what all the acronyms mean. So how is anybody supposed to understand who's not interested in this? So I think the language that we use, make that more fun, make it more accessible, and the education piece will come more naturally. People need to understand actually what's going on in the room and really how the issues are, what are the key issues more easily than they are right now. Right now it's very muddy.
Yeah. Thank you. Maddie, fun.
Yeah, I'm going to shout out Chris Dickerson and Players for the Planet over in North America. So they work with MLB athletes, Major League Baseball, and take them all over the Caribbean and all over the southeast of the U.S. doing beach cleanups and really kind of cool activities. And they bring 3-4 MLB players and get 400 kids come out, right? Their solution always is kind of twofold, and I had a conversation with Chris about it on the phone yesterday. We need more DJs at these things. Like, it's so simple, but like, put on a good beat and all of a sudden it's fun. It's kind of like cleaning your house. Like, if you have good music, it's more fun. So that's one, is just how do you create an atmosphere where this is gonna be a good time? Doesn't matter what we're doing, right? The whole point about sport is coming together. So how do we bring people together, add some music, good recipe right there. The other thing that they just do really, really well is it's always about your own backyard. It's something you care about, right? And they're not trying to make it too big or onerous. I think sometimes talk about climate change, it's just like, shoot, this world is so big, I don't know how to take that all on. The answer is don't, like don't. We can divvy this up and take care of our own backyards, and we go pretty far with that. Particularly here, you know, being in Great Britain, and I'm from Canada, like, richer countries have a huge potential to go beyond their fair share at this point, is what we need to do. So take care of your own backyard, get it right in your own backyard, do it with other people, add a DJ.
I love that.
I think you get there.
Excellent. Melissa?
Well, I love the add the DJ, and I love the gamification piece that Joe raised as well. I think for me as well, what fun seems to fit within is the recognition that this is about bringing emotion in as well as just thinking and data and information. And I think what we might be shifting towards is recognizing that it's okay, this is an emotive issue. It's okay for emotion to be expressed about it, and that doesn't actually make you less logical or less rational, provided that there's still the information and the fact behind it and there, which is key as well. Actually, I think this is now a feeling game as much as it is a thinking game, and we need to be tapping into that, which I think is something that sport does so powerfully.
And that came up in the last panel, actually, and certainly if I think about key moments in my life where I have been so moved, sport has been 90% of them, and that might tell you a bit about my life, but that's also true. And the point about the emotional mind, the rational mind, the bit in the middle is the wise mind, and that's the one we want, right? Some DBT there for you if anyone needs that. Sir.
Hi, thank you everyone for this great panel. I noticed that a lot of the commonalities that we've heard from each of the members here is really working with young people and trying to get others organized and working in the climate movement as well, and working in climate change as well, and kind of going down to the grassroots level. But I was wondering if anyone could speak to any experiences you've had, good or potentially bad, with more of the corporate sphere and more of the organizational decision makers that you might come across. So either in cases where they were very happy to acquiesce to certain questions and certain demands and wanted to make change, but also potentially cases where they were more reticent, more reluctant to actually make some of the changes. So speaking to some of the experiences you've had or that you'd like to have, speaking to some of these decision makers who are responsible for organizations who do really have a strong impact on carbon emissions throughout the world.
Great question, and as someone that had to engage and liaise with the IOC to get that video made, love to come to you first, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. I have nothing but positive words to say about how the IOC supported us over the last couple of months, and I think that as well. Before that point, I was working a bit with Team GB, the BOA, and before that with the GB Olympians Association. And I think a message I would have to athletes out there is that all three of those organizations were right behind what I was trying to do, and they were very keen that it wasn't seen. I think chatting in the crew room and in the changing room, things like that, sometimes athletes feel that if they start speaking about these issues, if not the public saying you're a hypocrite, they're going to get a feedback from their coaches that, is this you distracting your attention away from the goal? Are you shifting your vision and not focusing enough on what you need to do, which is deliver a performance? But actually these large-scale organizations that we've been trying to work with are right there saying, yeah, this is exactly what we want people to be doing. And maybe that's, I mean, I'm really interested to hear from the other panelists about what how they've experienced that, because I'm aware this is one piece of the pie. Yeah. But so far, so good.
Absolutely. So, Alexandra, working at SailGP, F1 on water, there's got to be corporate partners all over the space. How's that been?
It's interesting. You know, I think we all know that one of the big elephants in the room in sport is around sponsorship. You know, where do you get your money from? You know, who are you happy to accept money from? You know, and there are lots, that's like another hole we could go down. But I think the realities are that, you know, some companies are happy to more so than others. Some companies are more scared about what they're opening themselves up to, especially in the same way that athletes are scared about talking about something that they don't necessarily feel they know enough about. companies are also, if they're at the beginning of their journey, they're scared about taking that first step. For the most part, all of them are having to wake up. They don't have any choice. You know, we've seen it today with the financial institutions and what they're having to commit to. So I think we're seeing a shift, but it's not all, you know, plain sailing, for lack of a better word, set of words. It's, you know, it's still a rocky road, and and you have to also choose as a sport whether you want to partner with some of those companies, you know, and have that conversation with them at the beginning, and it's the same for athletes in terms of how the choices that they make. So I'm not going to comment massively on it, but I just think that it's, you know, some people are better than others, but, you know, some are further along the road than others.
I'd say my experience, I think that's a really good question, and I've seen a real transition over the last few years. So every year we produce a report at Planet Patrol with all the biggest polluters and break that down, and we approach them with our data and with our insights. And the response we've had this year or last year versus years before has been phenomenally different, because I think we've seen a lot of brands and these corporations now realise that they have to have these conversations with campaigners, with activists, with these kind of groups. They can't just shut the door and ignore it anymore. And then I think there's more of an understanding now that friction and the awkward discussions is actually a really positive thing. It's a sign of progress. It's a sign of moving forward. And they recognise that, whereas before that kind of the friction is seen as a real negative. So I think more of those kind of conversations are really important, and that shift from, I don't want to say aggressive, but more uncomfortable conversations is a really good thing.
Absolutely. Joe, in the machinery of a professional cricket club, how are you getting on?
Yeah, so firstly, I think within all of the environmental movement, we have to be really careful with focusing too much on individual action, because I think that happens far too much, and, you know, everyone can change whatever they want, and it's not actually going to make the change that we need from the leaders and from the higher powers. So firstly, that point, but then also I think within cricket's getting there. The ECB have recently appointed head of sustainability themselves, so that's great to hear. The ICC, which is the global cricket, are not quite there as much as well. I haven't heard anything that they've been doing, but yeah, I think cricket's getting there as well, and it's great to see.
And I think that point around, it is lazy when you just get challenged on your individual actions versus, and it's the point we made earlier, the hypocrisy argument is a lazy argument when actually the bigger picture is that we're doing things, and that a little bit about some of that policy change we are after. Maddie, from the sort of bigger picture that you've seen, any difficult, uncomfortable or open conversations?
I think as an academic, I approach these things with like, just here's the data, here's what the numbers tell us, here's what the research tells us. So I work in facts, and I try not to get emotions involved, and then they always end up on like front and center on the table, right? I think what's funny is if you look back, which I think is actually a good thing to your point earlier, I think if you look back, we had 5-6 decades of athletes putting themselves on the line, sticking their necks out, doing the work. And on everything from women's role to racism issues to everything. They got a lot of hell for that, right? Billie Jean King paid a high price. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's still paying for it. Colin Kaepernick, the proof is in the pudding. Athletes have put their neck on the lines over and over. Organizations in 2020 decided to start. And I think that was the big kind of shift. We've had a few organizations like the IOC that got involved a couple years earlier than that, so they're a little bit further along. But overall, it's just starting. And so I think that there's a little more flexibility around we're willing to be uncomfortable, to Lizzie's point, which is amazing. But ultimately, right now at this point, it's like the carrot is we need a good PR day still, and the stick is still a PR day. Like, we're not quite at the point where it's going to make a big difference on their bottom line, but that's coming. And we're not at the point where it's going to make a big difference on their reputation with their fans and their players, but that's coming too. And I think when we start to see those dominoes fall, the rest will come. And that's the conversation that I've been having with, the pro leagues in North America, the professional leagues. On this side of the pond is there is an expectation. So I expect we as a community expect you to meet it pretty soon.
Absolutely, and I think the evidence is that, Michael Porter started talking about this in 2012, right? The idea of shared value, where social impact is a business necessity. It's not philanthropy, which is nice and generous. It's not CSR, which is obligation. We come into business necessity. This is how we do business in the world. And it's great to see that organisations are starting to come along. We'll take one more question, and then I'm going to ask the gold medal question, so just so you know, please.
Hey. It's been so great to hear about the power of athletes to bring about this kind of change. But I was wondering if I could ask a bit about the power of the sports fans. What would your advice be to us, the supporters on the sideline? How can we help you as fans to achieve the goals that we all so desperately want to achieve?
Anyone want to take that one? What about people on the towpath? What do you want them to do?
I love that question. And I think what's really exciting is that there are organisations already. If we just look at the UK, there are organisations like Planet Super League and Pledge Ball and things like that that are trying to engage directly with fans. And a lot of that at the moment looks very much like this gamification piece. How can fans grow together? Because really, when we look at athletes and elite athletes and those people on the film or whoever, they are these single individuals. And yes, we're trying to join them into a team, but really the bigger team is the millions of people who watch, the 3.6 billion people who watch the Rio Olympics or the 3.5 billion followers of football. It's that team that needs to come together. So the more that individuals, I think, as fans, can be joining those dots amongst themselves and bringing themselves together, it's exciting that there are already those organisations doing that, but that can also be instigated by anybody within that fan base.
And presumably if someone just put Planet Patrol into the App Store or the Google Play Store, they could get your app and get out there and actually put some of that data in as they take their dog for the walk or do whatever they do there. Perfect. I'm going to do that when I take my dog for a walk tomorrow, which I'm excited about, by the way. Joe, Glamorgan fans.
Yeah, I think it'd just be great to see fans getting involved, being interested. It's something we've talked about a lot with cricket, because how long a day is at the cricket is such a great opportunity to educate as well as talk to people and get fans involved. But I think, yeah, just support the journey, get involved as much as possible, do as much as you can. That's all I can really say.
Thank you. So,
can I say one thing?
Of course.
I just think it's really important also for the fans to demand what they want, because that's the other thing is I think it helps, like if you have 3.5 billion, football fans pushing back and saying, no, we don't want, our shirts to be changed every single season or whatever, then actually that's going to lower the footprint of, within the fashion industry and in terms of textiles, etc. So I think it goes both ways. It's, I think the messaging that the clubs are putting out is one thing, but we also need the fans to say, we are demanding this of our sports teams, and we want you to represent what's important to us and, and what's important to our communities. So, yeah.
I think we saw evidence of how that worked with the European Super League, right? Didn't happen, and that was because of the fans, so absolutely. Very, very, very quick, rapid-fire answers. What's a gold medal performance for COP26?
Greater restrictions. The fact is that we need to hit proper, we need to up our levels. We can't stay on the track that we're on. We're not going to hit 1.5. That's very clear right now. So we have to literally accept, and we need to spend more money and engage more people fast.
I think not only that, but also answering the question, how exactly we're going to do that. I think that's what political leaders need to do, need to find out, we're going to need to do this to actually get there.
Perfect.
I'd like to see more attention on ocean conservation and plastic as part of discussions.
Okay, excellent. Important discussions.
I think carbon, being transparent about how we're measuring carbon between countries, it links into the social justice piece, but also if we relate it to sports, we had the introduction of doping guidelines and WADA and things like that. We need to make sure that everyone's on a level playing field, and offsetting feeds into that as well, and that whole picture I think is key.
I love the systemic changes you guys are talking about. This is fantastic, please.
I think we need to see different voices at the table than the ones who are currently there. I'm just going to say, 74% of talking time is going to white men this like that's a problem, and I think if you fix that, you start to see some other dominoes fall as well.
Absolutely. What a great way to round out this beautifully diverse panel who've shared such a great set of messages with us. So, Maddie, Dr. Orr, Fantastic, thank you. Melissa, congratulations once again. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and everything you shared. Thank you for giving me an action to do and for the work that you've done, and I'm really glad that you were able to use your recovery in such a positive way. What a really generous thing to do. So thank you. Joe, good luck in the new role. I can feel your passion for this, and I have no doubt you'll be a success and really have the opportunity to make cricket stand out for something really, really good. And Alexandra, thank you so much for sharing such a breadth of views and opinions, but also for making Sale GP such an awesome, authentic, credible, scratch below the surface proposition, because I also see the humility that says we haven't got this perfect, but we're doing as good as we can. And I think that maybe that's how we all move this conversation forward. So please give our panel a huge, huge round of applause. So that brings us to the end of the content that Think Beyond has pulled together throughout the course of the day. Thank you to One Young World and Extreme Hangout for giving us the opportunity to put sport front and centre. I get the privilege of doing that every single day in my daily life, and if you'd like to find out a little bit more about what we do, just hit up at We Think Beyond, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you everyone for the work that you're doing. You wouldn't be here if you weren't interested. So next time, please just bring someone who isn't interested, and we'll get them converted with incredible speakers like this. So thank you again. There's more content coming this evening. There's going to be a beat. There's going to be some music. So if you want to stay and have some fun, here is the place to be tonight. So thank you, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks.